The gold coin was still spinning at Clara Whitmore's feet when a widowed cowboy in the crowd noticed something Gideon Blackwell had completely missed. But what could make him follow a rejected bride into the Kansas night? The coin rattled across the Abilene depot boards. Clara bent slowly, her fingers closing around the gold as the platform fell silent. Gideon waited for her to accept his price for a broken promise. Instead, she straightened and walked toward him. What she did next caught one cowboy's attention. "Stay with us." The gold coin spun across the depot boards. Once, twice. It struck the heel of Clara Whitmore's boot, wobbled in a narrow circle, and settled in the dust between them. For several seconds, she did not bend for it. Neither did anyone else. Behind her, the westbound train breathed steam beneath the September sun. Porters moved trunks along the platform. A conductor called something toward the baggage car. Horses stamped beside the hitching rail beyond the station, bothered by coal smoke and the sharp whistle that had announced Clara's arrival in Abilene. Yet the little space around Clara had gone strangely still. She looked past the coin at Gideon Blackwell. 4 months of letters had taught her to recognize his handwriting before she knew the shape of his hands. She knew he owned cattle south of town. She knew he took his coffee without sugar. She knew he disliked thunderstorms because lightning had once killed 3 steers against a fence. She knew he wanted, according to his own careful words, a wife with enough sense to stand beside a man rather than behind him. And Gideon knew about the mark on her face. Clara had made certain of that. The dark birthmark ran along the left side of her face from near her temple toward her cheek. She had described it plainly in her second letter, because she had no intention of traveling nearly 1,000 miles under a misunderstanding. Gideon had answered that appearance mattered less to him than character. Now his eyes told a different story. "For your trouble," he said, glancing toward the coin. Clara's fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase. "My trouble?" Gideon lowered his voice, as though quiet cruelty might somehow become kindness. "You've traveled a considerable distance." "So I have." "I believe it would be best if we were sensible." A woman waiting beside 2 carpetbags stopped pretending not to listen. Clara kept her eyes on Gideon. "You received my letters?" "Of course." "All of them?" "Yes." "The one where I described my face?" Something shifted in his expression. He glanced toward the station doors. "That isn't necessary. It seems necessary to me." "Miss Whitmore." "You knew." His jaw hardened. "I understood your description differently." Clara stared at him. "You wrote that it made no difference." "I may have spoken imprecisely." The words were so polished that for one strange instant they hurt worse than an insult would have. Clara thought of Philadelphia, of evenings spent writing by lamplight after work was finished, of the train ticket folded into her handbag, of Gideon's promises that Kansas offered room for 2 sensible people to build something honorable. Then she looked at the coin. "You lied." Nobody moved. Gideon's face colored. "I would advise you not to make a public spectacle. I stepped off a train, expecting to meet the man who asked me to become his wife. You threw money at my feet." His eyes sharpened. "I am attempting to compensate you. For believing you? Take the money before I reconsider my generosity." Clara bent down. A murmur moved through the platform. Gideon relaxed almost imperceptibly. Clara picked up the coin. She brushed the dust from it with her thumb, walked 2 steps to the wooden railing, and placed it carefully on top. "Keep it," she said. "You clearly need it more than I do." Then she lifted her suitcase and walked away. Near the freight doors stood a weathered man in a brown coat and dust-darkened boots. His hat shaded most of his face. He had watched the entire exchange without joining the whispers. Clara never saw his eyes follow her. Not her birthmark, her hand. the hand that had left Gideon Blackwell's gold behind. By the time Clara reached the narrow passage between the livery stable and the dry goods store, her arm was trembling from the suitcase. She set it down. Only then did she allow herself one long breath. She opened her handbag and counted what remained. Not enough to make foolish decisions, enough to avoid desperate ones. She smoothed the edge of her unused return ticket, folded it again, and put it away. Crying could wait. First she needed a room, then work, then tomorrow. "You looking for somebody?" Clara turned. A broad-shouldered woman carrying a market basket stood at the end of the passage. "No, ma'am. I believe I've finished looking for somebody." The woman studied her for a moment. Then, mercifully, she did not ask what happened. Her name was Ruth Garrett. Within 10 minutes, Ruth had given Clara something far more useful than pity: the address of Prudence Alcott's boarding house. Prudence stood in her kitchen with flour on one sleeve and suspicion in both eyes. "You bake biscuits?" "Yes." "Bread?" "Yes." "Breakfast for 12? If the stove behaves?" Prudence almost smiled. "It doesn't." "Then I suppose we'll have to reach an understanding." That earned the smile. Clara was given an apron before she was given a room. By late afternoon, she had earned both. That evening, the boarding house dining room smelled of roast onions, coffee, and fresh bread. Clara worked while conversations rose and fell behind her. Eventually, Miss Hallie, one of the boarders, appeared in the kitchen doorway. "I was at the depot today." Clara continued drying a plate. Miss Hallie hesitated. "I only meant, I've got breakfast to prepare before 6. Clara placed the plate on the shelf. "I'd rather spend tonight preparing for tomorrow than discussing yesterday." Miss Hallie nodded once. "All right." It was the first kindness Clara received that evening, because it required the other woman to say nothing more. Later, as Clara covered the bread dough, Dottie came hurrying into the kitchen. "There's a man waiting on the back porch." Clara's hands stopped. "What man?" "Says his name is Elias Ward." Clara stepped outside. The cowboy from the depot rose from a chair near the porch rail. Up close, he looked older than she had first thought. Not old, worn. Sun had settled permanently into the lines beside his eyes. His coat had been mended at one elbow, and he held his hat with both hands. "Miss Whitmore, you were at the station." "Yes, ma'am. If you came to tell me you felt sorry for me, Mr. Ward, you've wasted your ride." "I didn't." That answer came too quickly to be rehearsed. Clara waited. Elias looked toward the dark yard. "My wife died 14 months ago." Clara said nothing. "I have 2 daughters. Lucy is 9. May is 6. His thumb moved once along the brim of his hat. "I own a ranch 12 miles south. Though own sounds more comfortable than the truth. Cattle prices have been poor. Fence needs replacing. Cash is thin." Clara almost smiled. Gideon Blackwell had spent 4 months describing everything admirable about himself. Elias Ward had been speaking for less than 2 minutes, and had already listed 3 reasons she should refuse him. "What exactly are you offering?" "Work, room, meals, wages, though not generous ones." "Doing what?" "Cooking, keeping accounts if you can, helping with the house, and your daughters?" He looked directly at her then. "My daughters need a mother like you." Clara's expression changed. Elias saw it and immediately shook his head. "That came out wrong." "Yes. I'm not asking you to replace their mother." His voice softened. "They had one. Her name was Sarah. They loved her. I loved her. Nothing changes that." He paused. "What they need is someone who can show them what a strong woman does when the world turns against her." Clara looked at him for a long moment. You decided all that from watching me at a railway station? No. Then what did you decide? I watched you put that coin back. The sounds from the boarding house seemed farther away. You could have taken it, Elias said. Nobody there would have blamed you. But you decided what accepting it would cost you, and you walked away. Clara folded her arms. You need a housekeeper. Yes, a cook. Badly. Despite herself, Clara nearly laughed. You need somebody to help with your daughters. Yes. And your ranch is struggling. Yes. Anything else wrong with this wonderful opportunity? The roof leaks over the back room when rain comes from the west. Clara stared at him. Elias remained completely serious. At last she asked, When would you want me? Tomorrow, if you were free. I'm not. His brow lifted slightly. Mrs. Alcott gave me work when she had no reason to. I owe her notice. How much? 2 days. Elias put on his hat. Friday morning, then. You're assuming I've agreed. No, ma'am. He descended one porch step. I'll come Friday morning. If you decide against it, I'll turn the wagon around. Then he left. Dottie appeared almost immediately. Do you trust him? Clara watched Elias disappear beyond the gate. Did you hear him lie about anything? Dottie considered that. No. Clara kept watching the darkness. Neither did I. Friday morning came beneath a low Kansas sky. Elias arrived with a wagon and a roan mare named Bess saddled alongside it. Prudence pressed a cloth-wrapped loaf of cornbread into Clara's hands. For the girls. Then she lowered her voice. A desperate man can look like an honest man for a while. Clara glanced toward Elias. He was checking Bess's saddle strap. He pulled it once, tested the buckle, then checked it again before bringing the mare to Clara. Then I'll watch what he does when he isn't trying to impress me, Clara said. Elias handed her the reins. Storm may catch us before the ranch. Clara looked south. Rain hung dark over the prairie. She secured her suitcase to the wagon, placed one boot in the stirrup, and mounted. Behind her lay the depot, the boarding house, and a gold coin she had refused to carry into the rest of her life. Ahead waited 12 miles of open Kansas country and a house she had never seen. Somewhere beneath that darkening sky, 2 motherless girls were waiting for a stranger. Elias turned his horse south. Clara followed. Abilene disappeared behind them by degrees. First went the depot roof, then the church steeple, then the last warehouses and cattle pens blurred into the gray distance until there was nothing ahead but wagon road, prairie grass, and a sky heavy enough to promise rain. For the first 3 miles, Elias said almost nothing. Clara appreciated that. A man who could leave silence alone was becoming a rare thing in her experience. Bess carried Clara steadily beside the wagon. Her roan ears turned whenever thunder rolled somewhere west of them. Elias rode with one hand loose on the reins, occasionally looking toward the clouds, but never urging the horses beyond an easy pace. Eventually, Clara asked, "Tell me about your daughters." Elias looked ahead. Lucy is 9. I know that much. She thinks she's 30. Clara glanced at him. Elias's mouth moved slightly. She started helping after Sarah got sick, bringing water, folding clothes, watching May. After Sarah died, Lucy never quite stopped. And May? May is 6 and still believes most troubles can be improved by asking enough questions. That sounds useful. Depends on the questions. A few drops of rain darkened the road. Elias reached behind his saddle and passed Clara a folded oilskin cape. She took it. You brought 2? I checked the weather yesterday. No flourish. No attempt to turn consideration into courtship. Just preparation. Clara pulled the oilskin around her shoulders. "What do you need most from me, Mr. Ward?" He took longer answering that. "My daughters need to see a woman solve real problems again. Not cooking, not washing, not keeping May quiet." Clara thought of her own mother in Philadelphia whenever money ran short. She would place both palms flat against the kitchen table and refuse to leave it until every bill, coin, and possibility had been considered. "I can do that," Clara said. "I know." She looked sharply at Elias. He seemed unaware that 2 quiet words could be more unsettling than praise. By the time they reached Ward Ranch, the rain had passed east, leaving the grass shining beneath a weak afternoon sun. The ranch sat in a shallow rise above a creek lined with cottonwoods. The house was plain but solid, with weathered siding, a stone chimney, and a porch facing west. A barn leaned slightly away from the prevailing wind. Beyond it stretched cattle pasture, divided by fences that had been repaired so many times the posts seemed to belong to several different decades. 2 girls stood at the gate. The smaller one waved both arms. The older one did not. "May and Lucy," Elias said. May reached them before Clara had both boots on the ground. "What's in there?" She pointed to the cloth bundle tied behind Clara's saddle. "Cornbread. Is it good? You'll have to decide." May considered this fair. Lucy remained by the gate. She was thin, solemn, and had her father's watchful eyes. "Miss Whitmore," Elias said, "this is Lucy." Lucy nodded. Then she asked, "Do you make pie?" Clara understood the question had very little to do with pie. "I do." "What kind?" "Depends what we have." Lucy seemed to think about that. "All right." Inside, Clara found a house that had not been neglected so much as endured. The stove was good. The table had been scrubbed. Firewood was stacked properly. A broken chair waited beside the wall for repair. A clock on the mantel had stopped at 20 minutes past 4, and the kitchen curtains had faded almost colorless. May pointed at them. "They're sad." Clara studied them. "Yes," she said. "They are. Can you fix them?" "I believe so." Lucy, removing plates from a cupboard, stopped for half a second. Clara noticed. She said nothing more about the curtains. That evening she examined Elias's pantry. Beans, flour, salt pork, dried peppers, molasses, 3 onions beginning to soften. Elias leaned against the doorway. "We mostly eat beans. I gathered that." May complains. "I do not," May announced from the table. Lucy looked at her sister. "You cried Tuesday. They were very bad beans." Clara turned away so the girls would not see her smile. She browned salt pork, softened onions in the drippings, added peppers, beans, and a little molasses, then left the pot to settle over low heat while she made biscuits. At supper, May took one bite. Her eyes widened. "It's a miracle." Lucy frowned into her bowl. "It's still beans." Then she ate every spoonful. Clara did not mention that either. The next morning, her first loaf of bread burned. Elias's stove drew hotter than Prudence Alcott's, and by the time Clara smelled trouble, one side of the loaf had gone nearly black. May inspected it gravely. "So you aren't perfect." Clara scraped the burned crust with a knife. "That must be disappointing." May thought about it. "Not especially." From the doorway came a sound Clara had not heard before. Elias laughing. Only once, quietly. Then he put on his hat and went to the south fence. Days found their rhythm. Clara discovered a bolt of faded yellow cloth in a chest and remade the kitchen curtains. May helped and produced stitches large enough to trap a mouse. Clara left them. Lucy watched from the table. A week later, Lucy began doing her schoolwork there while Clara kept household accounts at the opposite end. One afternoon, Lucy erased the same arithmetic problem until the paper nearly tore. I don't understand this. She did not look up. Clara closed the ledger. Instead of sitting opposite Lucy, she walked around and took the chair beside her. Show me where it stopped making sense. Lucy pushed the paper toward her. That was all. But when Elias came inside at dusk, he saw them still sitting shoulder to shoulder. Several nights later, he found something else. Lucy had hidden half a biscuit in her apron, then another beneath a napkin. When he questioned her, she finally whispered that cattle were selling poorly, and fences cost money, and maybe food would run out. Elias went very still. You heard me talking about money? Lucy nodded. I can eat less. No. His voice came harder than he intended. Lucy flinched. Clara touched Elias's sleeve, not to silence him, to slow him. Don't praise her for helping, Clara said quietly. Tell her to eat. Elias looked at Clara. She needs to be 9. Something in his face gave way. He crouched beside his daughter. You eat your supper, Lucy. All of it. Keeping food in this house is my responsibility, not yours. Lucy's chin trembled. But I can help. You can. Elias reached for her hand. By being 9. That night, Lucy asked for another biscuit. After the girls went upstairs, Elias brought a thick ledger to the kitchen table. This is the ranch. Clara opened it. On paper. Paper version is less muddy. She spent nearly an hour reading. Feed purchases, fence wire, nails, veterinary costs, cattle receipts, taxes, repairs, payments received and payments postponed. Elias sat beside her, close enough that the sleeve of his shirt occasionally brushed hers when they both reached for a page. Neither moved away. Why is this here every month? Clara tapped a column. South fence. You keep repairing it. I keep hoping it'll develop gratitude. It hasn't. No. Why not replace the posts? Elias looked at her. Replacing them costs money I don't have. Clara turned another page, then another. What about the north pasture? Mostly unused. Why? Water. There's a creek, lower ground. Wrong side for most of the grazing. Clara stared at the figures. What if you brought the water where you need it? Elias leaned closer. She took a pencil and made a rough line beside one of his property sketches. A shallow gravity-fed trench, perhaps. Or a line from higher along the creek if the grade allows it. Elias studied the mark. For a long time he said nothing. Then he stood, took another survey sheet from a drawer, and spread it across the table. Their shoulders nearly touched. I've owned this ground 11 years. And I've been thinking too close to the problem. Clara looked at the tired lines around his eyes. You've been raising 2 girls and holding a ranch together alone for 14 months. His pencil stopped. You're allowed to be tired, Elias. It was the first time she had used his given name. Neither mentioned it. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. Elias slowly set the pencil down. No one said that. Clara closed the ledger. Then no one was paying attention. Weeks passed. The curtains stopped looking sad. The clock was repaired. May's laughter began turning up in every room. Lucy still carried herself too seriously sometimes, but she stopped hiding food. And Elias began coming home differently. One evening, after 12 hours replacing fence braces, he reached the kitchen door and stopped outside. Clara was showing Lucy how to check a column of figures backward. Lucy made a mistake. Clara raised one eyebrow. Lucy saw it. Then the girl laughed. Not politely, not carefully, She laughed until May demanded to know what was funny and began laughing too without understanding why. Elias stood outside with mud on his boots and his gloves tucked beneath one arm. For 14 months he had kept everyone alive. He had repaired roofs, cooked beans, washed clothes badly, braided hair worse, paid bills late, buried his wife and risen every morning because 2 girls required him to. But he had forgotten what a house sounded like when nobody inside it was afraid. Clara looked toward the doorway. Their eyes met. Elias did not say thank you. Clara did not ask why he was standing there. She simply moved his supper closer to the warm side of the stove. 3 days later, Clara rode Bess into Abilene for flour, lamp oil, coffee, and a new box of ledger pencils. She was comparing 2 bolts of cloth inside Harland Marsh's dry goods store when a familiar voice came from behind her. Miss Whitmore. Gideon Blackwell. Clara turned. He was dressed as carefully as he had been at the depot. His gaze moved over her riding coat, gloves, and the Ward Ranch supply list in her hand. You stayed. That appears to be the case. With Ward? Yes. Gideon gave a small smile. I wouldn't grow comfortable. Clara set the cloth down. Why? Ward's struggling. She said nothing. Gideon continued. Poor cattle season. South fence eating what little cash he has. More land than he can properly use. Clara's expression did not change, but something inside her did. Those details were too precise. You take a remarkable interest in another man's troubles. I take an interest in land. That sounds more truthful than most things you've said to me. His smile vanished. Clara paid for her supplies and walked outside. Bess waited at the hitching rail. Clara untied the reins, but she did not mount immediately. Ward's struggling. South fence. More land than he can properly use. At the depot, Gideon's words had wounded her because they were personal. These frightened her because they were not. Why did Gideon Blackwell know so much about Elias Ward? 4 days later, Clara received part of the answer. Elias had ridden west before sunrise to inspect cattle when a horse came hard into the yard. Dale Pritchard dismounted. He was a neighboring rancher with a narrow face, graying beard, and the habit of removing his hat before delivering bad news. He removed it now. Clara stepped onto the porch. Mr. Pritchard? He looked past her toward the north pasture, then toward the cottonwoods marking the creek. Blackwell's buying ranches. Clara waited. Pritchard pointed north. But I don't think it's the cattle he's after. Clara followed his finger toward the cottonwoods. Beyond them, the creek bent through Wardland before running east and south toward neighboring properties. What then? Water. Pritchard rested his hat against his thigh. In 71, before half these fences were here, 6 properties signed an agreement over that creek. Ward ground sits upstream. Water passes through here before it reaches most of us. Clara looked toward the narrow ribbon shining beneath the trees. And Blackwell? Been buying distressed places since cattle prices dropped. Quiet purchases. Nothing unlawful about that. Yet. Pritchard nodded. He gets Ward Ranch. He gets the most useful upstream position in the valley. Clara remembered Gideon inside the dry goods store. Poor cattle season. South fence. More land than Elias could properly use. What has he already bought? Enough to make me nervous. Clara did not answer. She had learned something important in Philadelphia and relearned it at the Abilene depot. Suspicion was not evidence. For 2 days, she said nothing to Elias. Instead, she worked. She opened the ranch ledger after breakfast and traced every payment connected to land, fencing, taxes, and water. She rode the northern boundary with Pritchard and stood ankle-deep in dry grass while he showed her where the creek crossed Ward property. The next morning, she rode into Abilene with Elias. Miss Hallie told them where county deeds were recorded. The office occupied 2 cramped rooms behind a hallway that smelled of dust, lamp oil, and old paper. Bert Sykes sat behind a scarred desk. Clara placed a parcel description before him. "I'd like to see the recent transfers adjoining these properties." Sykes looked past her. "Mr. Ward, you looking into a sale?" Elias removed his gloves. "Miss Whitmore asked you a question." Sykes blinked. "Yes, but property records can get complicated." Clara waited. Sykes tried again. "Mr. Ward, if you'll tell me what you need, I need you to answer her." That was all Elias said. He took a chair against the wall and crossed one boot over the other. Sykes finally turned to Clara. "What parcel?" She slid the description closer. 3 hours later, the table was covered with copied deed references, survey descriptions, and a county map held flat beneath 2 ink bottles. The pattern emerged slowly. One distressed property, then another. A narrow parcel near the southern crossing. Then something that made Clara stop. "What is this?" Sykes leaned over. "Water access easement." "When?" "June." "Buyer?" He checked the record. "Gideon Blackwell." Elias came to the table. Clara traced the creek with one finger. "Ward Ranch upstream. Blackwell's easement downstream." She moved between the 2 points. "He doesn't need every ranch." Elias looked at her. "What? He only needs both ends." Silence settled over the records room. On the ride home, Elias was quiet. Clara knew the reason before he spoke. "How long have you suspected this?" 2 days. His jaw tightened. "You waited 2 days?" "I wanted facts." "It's my ranch, Clara." "I know. My daughters sleep there." "I know that too." "Then why was Pritchard telling you things about my land before I knew there was something to be told?" Clara pulled Bess to a stop. Elias rode several yards before turning back. Wind bent the prairie grass between them. "I was not hiding danger from you. That's what it feels like. I was making certain there was danger. And if Blackwell had done something while you were making certain, then we would have dealt with what he actually did instead of frightening Lucy and May over something we imagined." Elias looked away. Clara's voice softened. "I'm not trying to take your problem away from you." He looked back. "I'm trying to stand inside it with you." Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Elias nodded once. "All right." It was not an apology. Not quite. But when they started home again, he rode beside her instead of ahead. 3 afternoons later, Gideon Blackwell came through the Ward gate. Elias was checking cattle with Pritchard. Clara stood on the porch with a dish towel in one hand as Gideon dismounted. His gaze traveled across the yard. The woodpile was orderly. Broken plaster near the porch had been repaired. The kitchen curtains showed clean yellow through the window. A new brace held the gate square. The place no longer looked like a ranch waiting to fail. "I came to speak with Ward." "He isn't here." "I can wait." "You may." Gideon studied her. "You've made yourself comfortable. I've been working." "So I see." His attention moved toward the creek. "I intend to make Ward an offer." "For what?" "The ranch. You should discuss that with Elias." "I intend to." "Then we agree." Gideon's patience thinned. "You're his housekeeper, Miss Whitmore. I manage his accounts. You manage his kitchen and his children." Clara folded the dish towel once. "I know his debt, his boundaries, his cattle projections, and the terms attached to his creek. So if you came here expecting someone who doesn't understand what you're buying, you came on the wrong afternoon." Gideon said nothing. For the first time since Clara had met him, he looked at her without dismissing what he saw. Smart women know when they're overextended. Is that a threat? An observation. Clara stepped down from the porch. Then observe this. Elias isn't alone anymore. Gideon put on his hat. His expression barely changed, but he did not wait for Elias. He rode away. That evening, Clara told Elias everything before he had removed his coat. He listened without interruption. When she finished, he looked through the kitchen window toward the road Gideon had taken. I don't like him coming here when I'm gone. I didn't particularly enjoy it either. Elias turned. You all right? Yes. He studied her long enough to make certain she meant it. Then he nodded. The next useful piece came from Ruth Garrett. When Clara showed her the old water agreement, Ruth sat at Prudence Alcott's back table and became very still. My husband lost a water dispute 20 years ago. She opened a drawer and removed a bundle of papers tied with faded string. We learned the objection procedure after the deadline. You kept this? I keep mistakes that cost money. Ruth untied the bundle. If all affected owners file jointly, the county has to consider the shared injury, not only one property at a time. Clara looked at her. How much time? Ruth checked the old procedure against the current notice. Not much. 2 nights later, 6 landholders crowded into Ruth's back room. Pritchard came first. Connolly came last. He stood near the door with his coat still buttoned. I don't enjoy picking fights with men rich enough to hire Wichita lawyers. Clara spread the county map across the table. Neither do I. Then why are we here? She pointed to Blackwell's first purchase, then the second, then the downstream easement. Finally, her finger stopped at Ward Ranch. Nobody spoke. Clara looked around the table. If Elias sells, which one of you asks Gideon Blackwell for water first? Connolly's eyes dropped to the map. That question accomplished what 20 minutes of argument could not. Pritchard signed first. Connolly signed fourth. By the time the lamp burned low, there were 6 names beneath the complaint. After everyone left, Elias remained at the table. He looked at the signatures, then at Clara. Ruth knew the procedure, Clara said. Pritchard brought half the men. Miss Hallie helped with Clara. She stopped. You did this. Her first instinct was to answer, to divide the credit until there was almost none left for her. Instead, she let the words remain where he had put them. Elias's eyes stayed on hers. Something quiet passed between them. Not gratitude alone. Not yet anything either was willing to name. The following Tuesday, a stranger in a black wool coat arrived carrying a leather document case. He introduced himself as a representative for Gideon Blackwell. He did not enter the house. He handed Elias a sealed envelope. Mr. Blackwell's written offer. 15 days. Then he left. Elias opened it at the kitchen table. Clara watched his eyes move down the page. How much? He handed it to her. She read the figure twice. It was far above what she expected. Enough to clear every debt in the ledger. Enough to put money aside for Lucy and May. Enough for Elias to purchase smaller acreage elsewhere and stop waking before daylight wondering which fence, bill, or cattle price might ruin him next. May was upstairs. Lucy sat in the parlor reading. The kitchen remained very quiet. Clara placed the paper down. What do you want to do? Elias pressed both palms against the table. Sarah planted those cottonwoods. Clara waited. She chose where the barn went because she said I'd put it somewhere foolish if left alone. A faint breath almost became a laugh. It did not. Lucy was born in that bedroom. May, too. He looked toward the dark window. I've spent 14 months wondering whether holding on was courage or just fear of letting go. Clara did not tell him to refuse. She did not tell him to accept. The choice belonged to him. Finally, Elias straightened. I'm not selling. Clara looked at the offer, then at him. Then we make staying possible. We. The word rested between them. Neither corrected it. Clara drew a clean sheet of paper from the ledger drawer and wrote the refusal in her steady hand. Elias read it, signed his name. He folded the letter once, then stopped. What happens when this is over? Clara glanced toward the stack of repair figures. We repair the south fence. Elias shook his head. I meant you. Clara's hand stopped above the ledger. Outside, wind moved softly through the cottonwoods. Somewhere upstairs, May whispered something, and Lucy told her to go to sleep. Clara closed the account book. I don't know. Elias remained across the kitchen table. When I came here, we agreed on wages, meals, and a room. You needed help. I needed work. That was September. Yes. And now? Clara looked toward the repaired curtains. Now it's harder to tell where the agreement ends. Neither of them moved. She finally said, if we save the ranch, you may be able to hire ordinary help. Something changed in Elias's face. And if you can, Clara continued, then I suppose I'll have to decide what comes next. He seemed ready to speak. Instead, he reached for his coffee. All right. It was such a small answer that Clara felt it more sharply than she expected. The following weeks filled themselves with work. They measured the north pasture before the ground froze hard. Elias drove stakes while Clara recorded distances in the margin of an old feed invoice. Together, they calculated what a shallow gravity-fed waterline might cost in spring. They patched the worst section of south fence. They reduced feed waste. Clara rewrote household expenses into neat columns, while Elias calculated which cattle could be held for better weight and which needed selling. Their lives drew closer without either of them saying so. One afternoon, Clara complained twice about the pantry latch catching. The next morning, it opened beneath her hand without a sound. She found fresh screws in the wood. Elias never mentioned them. 3 days later, he put on his winter coat and discovered the torn lining had been stitched. He looked across the kitchen. Clara was rolling biscuit dough. Coats fixed. I noticed. You fixed it? The mice didn't. His mouth almost smiled. That was all. Yet the question from the kitchen table remained between them. What happens when this is over? By early December, the county hearing could no longer be postponed. They left Ward Ranch before sunrise. Frost whitened the road into Abilene, and Bess's breath rolled in pale clouds ahead of the wagon. Ruth Garrett was already waiting outside the county building. Dale Pritchard arrived with Edna. Connolly came alone, carrying his copy of the complaint folded inside his coat. Gideon Blackwell arrived last. Beside him walked Attorney Hargreave of Wichita, a narrow-faced man with polished boots and a leather case that looked expensive enough to pay for half Elias's south fence. Commissioner Aldous Hayes heard the matter in a second-floor room heated by an iron stove. Hargreave spoke first. He was calm. That made him more dangerous. Every parcel Blackwell purchased had been lawfully transferred. The downstream easement had been properly filed. No single acquisition violated the 1871 agreement. Mr. Blackwell cannot be accused of breaking an agreement merely because neighboring owners dislike the success of his business. Hayes turned toward Clara's side. Elias placed the county map on the table. Clara unfolded it. Hargreave looked at her. Mr. Ward's representative? Elias answered. Miss Whitmore manages the records involved. Clara placed one finger on Blackwell's first acquisition, then the second, then the easement. Finally, Ward Ranch. Any one of these purchases may be lawful by itself. Hayes leaned closer. Clara continued. But a shared right can be destroyed without anyone violating it one piece at a time. The room became still. She showed him the creek. Upstream, downstream, the 6 properties between. If Mr. Blackwell controls both ends, the agreement may remain written on paper while becoming useless in practice. Hayes began questioning Hargreave. Dates, survey descriptions, the purpose of the easement. Whether Blackwell had approached Elias before or after acquiring downstream access. For the first time, Hargreave had to open his leather case again. Gideon said nothing. He simply watched Clara. Months earlier, at the depot, Clara had stood alone while he decided what everyone was supposed to think of her. Now Elias sat beside her. Pritchard was behind her. Connolly's signature was on the complaint. 5 other landholders had put their names beside Ward's. Clara did not look at Gideon again. Hayes finally removed his spectacles. I will issue a written determination within 20 days. No victory, no defeat, only waiting. Outside, Gideon passed Clara on the courthouse steps. You've made this very public. That was the idea. He looked at her for another moment, then walked away. Winter settled over Ward Ranch while they waited. Snow softened the prairie. Cattle stood with frost along their backs in the mornings. Wood smoke hung low above the chimney. The house grew quiet in a different way now. Not empty. Settled. Lucy worked arithmetic at the kitchen table while Clara checked accounts. May fell asleep near the stove with a rag doll beneath one arm. Elias watched the weather. One evening, the temperature dropped suddenly. By supper, wind was driving loose snow against the windows. Elias stood and pulled on his coat. Barn. Clara looked outside. Now. Latch on the west stall was loose this morning. I'll check the stock. How long? 20 minutes. He disappeared into the white. 20 minutes passed, then 40. At an hour, Clara stopped pretending. Lucy sat rigidly beside the stove. He's fine. She said it too quickly, too flatly. Clara recognized the child who had once eaten less because she feared food might run out. She crossed the room and put an arm around Lucy. The girl stiffened, then slowly leaned against her. You don't know he's fine, Lucy whispered. Clara would not lie to her, no. Lucy looked up. But I'm going to find him. Clara pulled on her heavy coat, wrapped a wool scarf around her head, and took the storm rope from its peg. She passed one end through the iron ring fixed beside the kitchen wall. Lucy understood. Her face went pale. Don't get lost. I won't. Clara tied the rope securely around herself. Stay with May. Keep this door shut until you hear me. Then she opened it. White. Nothing else. The wind struck hard enough to turn her shoulder. Clara gripped the rope. One step. Then another. The house disappeared behind her almost immediately. She could not see the barn. She could barely see her own boots. The rope tightened against her waist. Another step. Another. The cold found the gap beneath her collar. She kept moving. The next foot. That was all. Not the barn. Not Elias. The next foot. Her shoulder finally struck rough timber. Barn wall. Clara felt along it until she found the door. Inside, horses stamped and cattle shifted nervously. Elias! Nothing. She moved past the stalls. Then she saw a boot. He lay near the west stall, one arm beneath him. Elias. Clara dropped beside him. He was breathing. She touched his cheek. Cold. Elias, wake up. No answer. She could not carry him, so she dragged him a few inches, stopped, pulled again. His weight seemed impossible. The wind seized them when she opened the barn door. Clara gripped the rope with one hand and Elias's coat with the other. The next foot. She pulled, stopped, breathed, pulled again. The next foot. Her knees struck frozen ground. She got up. The rope led home. She followed it. When the kitchen door finally appeared through the snow, Lucy was already there. Together they pulled Elias across the threshold. May stood in her nightgown near the stove. She said nothing. They removed Elias's wet outer clothing and wrapped him in blankets beside the fire. Time passed strangely after that. Coffee went cold. The wind shook the windows. Lucy sat on one side of her father. May curled against her sister. Near midnight, Elias moved. His eyes opened. Clara was sitting on the kitchen floor beside him. He looked at her, then at the rope. It was still tied around her waist. She had forgotten it. "You came out there." "Yes." His voice was weak. "You dragged me from the barn?" "Yes." He stared at her for a long moment. "Clara." She waited. "Thank you." Her eyes dropped. "Go to sleep." He closed them. Clara remained beside him until morning. Elias recovered slowly over the next several days. No broken bones, a bruised shoulder, a hard knot behind one ear where he had apparently fallen after the frightened horse shoved against the stall gate. By the end of the week he could carry wood again, though Clara threatened to put the ledger over his head when he attempted anything heavier. One evening, after Lucy and May had gone upstairs, Elias sat at the kitchen table turning his hat between his hands. Clara noticed. He only handled that hat so carefully when words were giving him trouble. "What is it?" He looked down at the brim. "There's something about that day at the depot I never told you." Clara waited. Elias raised his eyes. "I saw you before Blackwell rejected you." Clara did not answer. The lamp between them gave a faint hiss. Upstairs, one of the girls turned in bed, and the old boards answered with a creak. Elias set his hat on the table. "I wasn't at the depot by accident." Clara's expression tightened. "Why were you there?" "I'd heard Blackwell was expecting a mail-order bride." "That explains why half of Abilene was there." "Not me." He rubbed one thumb along the worn edge of his hat. "I've watched Gideon make promises before. Land agreements, cattle arrangements. He'll give his word when giving it costs him nothing. Then circumstances change and suddenly he remembers the exact wording instead of the promise." Clara remembered the depot. "I spoke imprecisely. Even now, the words could make her hear that gold coin spinning against the boards. You thought he might reject me. I thought he might find some reason not to honor what he'd promised. And you came to watch?" Elias winced. "When you say it that way, I sound worse than I intended." "How should I say it?" He considered. "I suppose exactly that way." That almost drew a smile from her. Almost. "But I saw you first," he said. Clara became still. "You stepped down from the train before Blackwell reached you. You had that suitcase in your right hand. Brown traveling dress. Dust along the hem. You looked tired." "I was tired." "I know, no, you don't. There was a child crying from Kansas City to Junction City." Elias's mouth moved. "There. That's the part I didn't know." Clara folded her hands. "What did you know?" "That you didn't stand there waiting to be rescued." The room seemed smaller. You looked at the depot, the hotel sign, the street, the livery stable. Then you checked the ticket in your pocket. Clara remembered doing exactly that. "I thought you looked like somebody figuring out what she'd do if the person she was waiting for never came." Then Gideon had arrived. Then his eyes had found the birthmark along the left side of her face. Then the coin. Elias looked toward the dark window. When you put that money back on the railing, that answered something for me. Clara's voice was quiet. Because you weren't looking at my face? Elias turned back. I saw your face. No hesitation. No false kindness. I just didn't think it answered the question I was asking. What question? Who are you when something goes wrong? Clara looked at him. I got my answer. For once, she had nothing ready to say. 3 days later, the county letter arrived. Lucy carried it from the gate as though she were transporting a telegram from the president. Miss Clara. Clara came from the pantry, wiping flour from her hands. The envelope bore the county seal. Elias stood from the table. Nobody spoke while Clara opened it. Her eyes moved down the page. Commissioner Aldous Hayes had voided Blackwell's downstream easement as inconsistent with the shared water provisions of the 1871 agreement. May bounced once. Did we win? Clara kept reading. There is a 45-day appeal period. May stopped bouncing. So we didn't? We won this part. Elias watched Clara fold the letter. 45 days began. 30 passed. Then 40. On the 44th day, Clara checked the road twice. On the 45th, Elias rode into Abilene and returned after dark with no news of an appeal. The following evening, Clara served potatoes beside a small beef roast and said, almost casually, Blackwell's appeal window closed yesterday. May's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. So the bad man lost? He lost this. Is that enough? Clara glanced at Elias. Tonight it is. Elias reached for the serving bowl. Pass the potatoes. And somehow that ordinary sentence felt better than cheering. Gideon made one more move before winter released Kansas. He attempted to influence buyers connected with the Abilene Cattle Buyers Cooperative. But this time there was no quiet room in which one rancher knew one fact and another rancher knew something else. Connolly heard first. He rode to Pritchard. Pritchard spoke with 2 cooperative members. Ruth Garrett passed along the name of another rancher Gideon had approached. By the time Elias learned what was happening, the buyers already understood the pattern. The arrangement went nowhere. Gideon's greatest advantage had never been money alone. It had been silence. Clara had taken that from him. Spring came slowly. The north pasture water line was finished after the thaw. Elias and Pritchard cut the shallow grade, while Clara checked the measurements from the notes they had made before winter. Water finally moved where dry grass had once gone brown too early. The cattle began holding better weight. The household accounts stopped frightening Elias. The south fence held. The ranch was not rich, but one bad week would no longer destroy it. And that changed something else. One April evening, Elias placed the ledger on the kitchen table. Clara sat across from him. When spring comes, he said. What are you planning? She looked outside. Spring appears to have arrived without asking me. You know what I mean. Yes. She waited. I don't know. Elias opened the ledger. After the cattle sale, I can afford hired help. Clara's face changed so slightly, another man might have missed it. Elias did not. She lowered her eyes. I see. I needed you when I came to Prudence Alcott's boarding house. Clara's fingers tightened around her pencil. Elias stopped. He had begun badly. He tried again. That's why I couldn't ask you this until I didn't. Clara looked up. Silence stretched between them. My daughters don't need you to become their mother, Elias said. They love you. Her eyes softened. And I don't need you to save this ranch. He leaned forward, forearms against the same table where months earlier they had studied his failing accounts. I want you here when there isn't anything left to save." Clara did not move. Elias swallowed. "Would you marry me?" She looked down at the ledger. For a few seconds, she saw none of its numbers. She saw Philadelphia disappearing beyond a train window. 4 months of Gideon's letters, a Kansas depot, a gold coin. Ruth Garrett giving her an address instead of pity. Elias waiting on Prudence's porch. May calling the curtains sad. Lucy pretending not to need help with arithmetic. 6 signatures beneath a county complaint. A rope disappearing into white snow. Elias waking on the kitchen floor. Then she looked at the man sitting across from her. "Yes." Elias exhaled. "All right." Clara nodded. "All right." His hand moved across the table. Not quickly. He left it there between them. Clara placed hers over it. After a moment, she looked down at the ledger. "The northwest fence is still going to fail." Elias stared at her. Then he laughed. Not politely. Not under his breath. He laughed until Clara did too. They married beneath the cottonwoods in April. Those trees had been planted by Elias's late wife years before, and Clara never asked him to pretend otherwise. The first green leaves trembled above them. Ruth Garrett came in her best dark dress. Miss Hallie sat beside Lucy. Dale Pritchard brought Edna, and Connolly stood near the back looking uncomfortable in a clean collar. May lost one hair ribbon before the vows began. Lucy kept hers perfectly tied. When Elias took Clara's hand, his fingers trembled once. So did hers. But the moment Clara remembered afterward was not the kiss. It was Lucy. Halfway through the vows, the girl reached sideways. Her fingers found Clara's free hand. One squeeze. Then she let go. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. The cattle went to Wichita later that spring. Clara waited at Ward Ranch. Late one afternoon, she saw Elias's wagon coming up the road. She knew before he reached the porch. Something in the way he sat told her. He climbed down. "Well?" "South fence." Clara waited. All of it. Her eyebrows rose, and enough left to start the northwest section. Clara smiled. For the first time, Ward Ranch had moved beyond surviving. By summer, people had begun coming to Clara for questions that once would have been taken automatically to Elias. A neighboring family needed help straightening out feed accounts. Another rancher wanted to understand the county's water filing requirements before buying acreage. One afternoon at the feed store, a newcomer asked Dale Pritchard who knew the local water arrangements. Pritchard pointed across the room. "Talk to Mrs. Ward." Clara heard him. She did not smile immediately. For one brief instant, she heard another sound. A gold coin striking depot boards, spinning, spinning. Then the memory passed. That evening, the repaired fence ran dark against the prairie. Cattle grazed on the north pasture, where water now moved through land Elias had once believed useless. Cottonwood leaves whispered beside the creek. Inside the house, May was protesting bedtime. Lucy was explaining, with exhausted authority, that protesting bedtime had never once prevented bedtime. Clara and Elias sat on the porch. After a long silence, Elias said, "Blackwell wasn't wrong about your face." Clara turned toward him, very slowly. Elias saw the look. He nearly smiled. He was wrong about what it told him. Clara studied him. "And what does it tell you?" Elias considered the question with the maddening seriousness he gave to fence posts, cattle prices, and marriage proposals. Finally he said, "Nothing I couldn't learn better by listening to you." Clara looked toward the pasture again. Inside, May raised her voice. Lucy raised hers higher. The house was alive. Clara had once traveled nearly 1,000 miles believing a stranger's approval would open the door to another life. Instead, his rejection had left her on an Abilene platform, with everything she owned in one suitcase. But the coin had never measured Clara. Neither had Gideon's rejection, and Elias's love did not measure her either. Her worth had existed before either man looked at her. One man had seen her and decided he already knew enough. The other had kept discovering her. Elias stood. He held out his hand. Not to rescue her, not to lead her. They were simply going inside. Clara took it. Behind them, the Kansas prairie darkened beneath the summer sky. Ahead, lamplight spilled through the kitchen windows. Tomorrow would bring cattle, accounts, fence posts, weather, and some problem neither of them had anticipated. They would meet it the way they had learned to meet everything else, together. And somewhere in Clara's memory, the gold coin finally stopped spinning. Maybe that's the part of her story worth carrying with us. Because most of us know what it feels like to stand somewhere we never expected to be, holding the pieces of a future that didn't turn out the way we were promised. Maybe it was a person who walked away, a family wound that never quite healed, a door that closed when we were certain it was meant to open. Clara could have spent the rest of her life letting one man's rejection define that September afternoon. Instead, she kept walking. And Elias never tried to convince her that his love gave her value. He simply stood beside her long enough to know the woman who had possessed that value all along. Perhaps that's what real love looks like after the grand promises are gone. Someone repairing a latch because they heard you mention it once. Someone keeping supper warm. A child reaching for your hand. Two people choosing each other when neither one needs rescuing. If you had been Clara, standing on that Abilene platform with one suitcase and an uncertain road ahead, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. I'd truly like to know. And if stories about second chances, quiet courage, family, and the kind of love that helps old wounds finally rest mean something to you, you're welcome to subscribe and stay with us. There are more stories waiting down the trail. Some mysterious, some heartbreaking, and some that might leave a little more light burning in the window when they're over.